A roof on Bushwick Avenue, Brooklyn, June 1948, 5:45 in the morning. The sun is not up yet, but the sky is already pale. A man is on that roof. He is 43 years old. He works the second shift at a metal shop on Flushing Avenue, 10 blocks south of where he is standing. He has lived in the same 6-story walk-up since 1932. He has been a pigeon flyer, that is the word men in this trade use for themselves, since he was 9 years old when his uncle taught him how to read the sky. In front of him is a wooden shed, 12 feet long, 6 feet wide, 7 feet tall. He built it himself in 1939 from boards he scavenged off a construction site on DeKalb Avenue. Behind the shed door, 84 pigeons are waiting. He unhooks the small wire latch on the front of the coop. He raises a long bamboo pole with a strip of red rag tied to the end of it. He holds the pole over his head. He waves it once, sharply, in a circle. The shed door swings open. The birds leave the coop in a wave. 84 pigeons rise off a Brooklyn rooftop at 5:45 in the morning, and the city beneath them, the streetcars, the kitchens, the sleeping kids, the men already on their way to the docks, is mostly unaware. The flock climbs about 200 feet above his roof. They circle. They begin to wheel north, toward Williamsburg, in the direction he is pointing his pole. He stands on the roof and watches them. The shed behind him is the only piece of architecture in the city of New York that belongs entirely to him. The birds in the sky above him are the closest thing he has to property. The roof is not his. The building is not his. The shed itself is technically a structure built without permission. But on this roof, with these birds, on this morning, he is operating something that the city of New York and his landlord and his union and his wife and his children have all decided not to interfere with. This is what New York looked like on rooftops between roughly 1930 and 1960. There were thousands of him. Call him Sal. The specific man on this specific roof is a composite, drawn from oral histories collected by sociologist Colin Jerelmack at New York University in the 2000s, from feature reporting in the Brooklyn Eagle through the 1940s and 50s, and from the photographs of working flyers documented in this era by Helen Levitt, Aaron Siskind, and the photographers of the Federal Writers Project. Real men with names like Tony Romano, Sal D'Amato, Joe Pellegrino, Eddie Garcia stood on roofs exactly like this one in 1948 Brooklyn. We know their hobby in detail. We know less about their faces. The Sal walking us through this morning carries the documented routine of all of them. To explain how Sal got onto that roof, you have to walk back 40 years. The pigeons themselves came earlier. European settlers brought domesticated pigeons to North America as early as the 1600s. The birds escaped or were released, and feral populations established themselves in every American city by the 19th century. The hobby of keeping pigeons, breeding, training, racing them, came with later waves of European immigration. The Romans had kept pigeons. The Belgians had perfected pigeon racing in the 19th century. Italian, Irish, German, and Polish immigrants brought the craft to American cities through the late 1800s. What was different in New York was the architecture. By 1900, New York was the densest city in the United States. The tenement boom of the 1880s and 1890s had produced thousands of buildings, 5 and 6 stories, brick, flat-roofed, packed sometimes 20 to a block. The flat roofs were not part of anyone's lease. They existed for water tanks, for laundry lines, for fire code clearance, for the building's mechanical systems. Most landlords did not bother to lock the bulkhead doors that led to them. Most tenants never went up there. A whole tier of the city, 3 to 6 stories above the street, was effectively unmonitored. For a working-class boy in 1905 or 1915 who needed somewhere to be, that wasn't his apartment, wasn't the street, wasn't his school, and wasn't a place where adults were paying attention. The roof was paradise. The Lower East Side photo, Archive of the New York Tenement House Department, now held at the New York Public Library and the NYC Municipal Archives, contains images from 1900 onward of boys on tenement roofs, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, often with crude wooden structures behind them. By the early 1900s, some of those structures were pigeon coops. The historical record on the exact origin years is thin. Photographic and anecdotal evidence place identifiable rooftop coops on Manhattan and Brooklyn tenements by 1900 to 1910. The practice was unusual enough in 1905 to merit occasional mention in newspapers. By 1925, it was so widespread that newspapers stopped mentioning it. By the 1930s, photographers working for the Federal Writers Project and the Works Progress Administration, Russell Lee, Berenice Abbott, Aaron Siskind, Helen Levitt, were documenting rooftop coop culture as something that already felt rooted, already felt like part of the city's permanent texture. The Levitt photographs from the 1940s in particular show what the practice had become by Sal's era. Boys on rooftops in undershirts, wooden coops behind them, a flock of pigeons in the sky above the Manhattan skyline. The composition is repeatable across hundreds of images because the scene was repeatable across hundreds of rooftops. The Lower East Side, the East Bronx, Brownsville, East Williamsburg, Bushwick, Bedford-Stuyvesant, every dense working-class neighborhood with flat-roofed walk-ups had its flyers, and every flyer had a coop. By the early 1940s, by the consistent estimate of every flyer who lived through it and was later interviewed, you could stand on any rooftop in working-class Brooklyn at sunset and count between 15 and 40 pigeon coops on adjacent roofs. The sky above those neighborhoods on a clear evening contained, on a typical day, thousands of birds in motion. This is what made it more than a hobby. The flocks were too dense to ignore. They overlapped in the air. They created what the men flying them called the war. The war is not a metaphor for these men. The war is the thing the hobby is actually about. Here is how it works. Every flyer in the neighborhood releases his birds at roughly the same time of morning or evening when the air is still and the birds will fly. The flocks rise, they circle, they are trained through months and years of patient work to recognize their own co-ops and return to them. But pigeons are not perfect. Pigeons get distracted. Pigeons follow other pigeons. Pigeons, especially young ones, are sometimes seduced by a flock that isn't their own. A skilled flyer learns to use this. He waves his pole with the rag on the end of it. The pole is a signaling device. The birds have learned to associate certain motions with directions. He waves his flock toward a rival flyer's flock that is in the air above the next block over. The flocks meet. They circle together for a moment, and in that moment, if the rival flyer is not paying close enough attention or his birds are not as well trained, some of his birds will follow Sal's flock back down. Sal closes the coop door behind them. He has captured, on a typical week, 2 or 3 of his rival's birds. The captured birds are called prisoners of war. Their leg bands, small metal rings stamped with the original owner's identifier, are removed and kept. Sal has, on a board nailed to the inside wall of his coop, 273 captured leg bands accumulated over the past 9 years. The board is the most carefully kept object in his life. His wife has a wedding ring. Sal has a board of pigeon bands. The captured birds either stay in Sal's coop and become part of his flock, or, more often, they are quietly returned to their original owner in exchange for a beer at a pet shop on Flushing Avenue, or they are sold to another flyer for a few dollars, or they are bred into Sal's stock and their offspring become his. Every flyer in the neighborhood is doing this to every other flyer. The aerial geometry of a Brooklyn neighborhood at 6 in the morning in June 1948 is not random. It is a map of overlapping territories that the men below are constantly negotiating, constantly attacking, constantly defending. The pole waving is not arbitrary motion. The pole waving is a chess game played in the sky, with each man trying to draw birds toward himself and away from his neighbors. The historian Colin Jeromack, whose 2013 book, The Global Pigeon, is the most careful academic study of this subculture, calls the rooftops a primary group, a sociologist term for the small, intimate community in which a person's identity is formed. For the men in Sal's neighborhood, the rooftop primary group was as important as ethnicity, as important as work, sometimes as important as family. The men they flew against were the men they knew best. The men whose birds they captured were also the men they drank with at the pet shop on Flushing. You captured a man's bird, you bought him a beer. That was the rule. The reason this matters is that the rooftops in the 1930s and 1940s and 1950s were one of the few spaces in working-class New York where men of different ethnicities, Italian, Irish, German, increasingly Puerto Rican, increasingly Black, formed close, sustained, daily relationships. The streets below were sorted by block and by parish. The bars were sorted by ethnicity. The unions were sorted by trade and by neighborhood, but the rooftops, where the birds were sorted only by who could keep birds well. Sal, on his roof in Bushwick in 1948, drinks beer with an Irish flyer named Eddie 3 blocks east and a Puerto Rican flyer named Hector 6 blocks south, and they have known each other for years through the geometry of their birds. None of them would have met any other way. The birds were the thing they had in common. To get inside Sal's coop, you walk through 6 floors of building first. The building is a pre-war walk-up on Bushwick Avenue. It is one of approximately 15,000 similar buildings in Brooklyn in 1948. The front door has no doorman, no lock that works reliably. The hallway has worn linoleum that the landlord stops replacing sometime in the late 1930s. The mailboxes are tin, dented from years of impatient kids hammering them open. The first floor smell is cabbage in the morning, garlic at night, depending on which apartment is cooking. There is no elevator. Sal climbs to the 6th floor. There's a door at the end of the hallway marked roof, no admittance. The lock has been removed at some point in the last 20 years and never replaced. Sal pushes the door open, climbs the metal stairs of the bulkhead, and emerges onto the roof. He has done this every morning for 9 years. The roof is not flat in any clean sense. It has the standard tar and gravel surface that Brooklyn walk-ups used in the 1920s, partially patched in 1944 when the building's owner finally addressed a leak, with a low parapet around the edge that comes up to about Sal's knees. There's a wooden water tank on the southwest corner, a Rosenwach tank installed in 1928, replaced in 1957. There are 3 brick chimneys, 2 for boilers, and 1 for an old fireplace that has not been used since the 1910s. There are clotheslines strung between 2 metal poles. There is a galvanized vent for the kitchens of 2 of the upper apartments. In the open space between the chimneys and the parapet, Sal's coop sits. He pushes open the wire mesh door of the coop and steps inside, ducking slightly to clear the low frame. The interior is quiet now. The flying birds are still in the sky above Bushwick, circling in the direction he sent them. He moves left first, along the back wall. 16 breeding boxes line the wall, each one a foot square, lined with fresh straw. He runs his fingers along the rim of the 3rd box from the left. The pair inside this box, a male and female he has bred together since 1944, have produced 14 surviving chicks across 4 years. They are his strongest pair. He saves them for last. He checks them when he comes back through. He moves to the front of the coop, where the youngest birds are kept, the ones too young to fly with the flock. He counts. 11. The same 11 as yesterday. None lost overnight. He moves right to a small section he calls the medical wall. 3 perches, empty this week, which is a good week. Last month he lost a hen to respiratory infection that spread from one of the captured birds, The medical wall held 5 sick pigeons through the worst of it. The straw on the floor of this section is changed twice a week instead of once. He picks up a metal scoop from a hook on the wall. He fills the long feed trough that runs the length of the eastern wall. Mixed grain from a 50-pound sack he keeps in a metal trash can next to the trough, lid weighted down with a brick to keep mice out. The grain comes from a pet shop on Knickerbocker Avenue. He goes through 1 sack every 2 weeks. The shop owner, a man named Joseph Aiello, lets Sal store an extra sack in the back room when supply runs short. He carries an empty bucket to the water trough at the back. The trough is dry. The birds drank it down yesterday. He will refill it from his apartment when he goes back down. And then, last, he turns to the trophy wall. The wall faces the door, the first thing any visitor would see when stepping into the coop. It is roughly 4 feet wide and 5 feet tall, and it is covered in tight rows with leg bands, 273 of them. Each band is small, about the size of a wedding ring, color-coded in blue or red or yellow or green, stamped with the original owner's identifier number. Each band, before it became a trophy, was clipped to the leg of a pigeon belonging to another flyer in the neighborhood. Each one represents a bird Sal captured. He has been keeping the wall since 1939. He can, if asked, tell the story of any individual band on it. The blue one in the upper left corner, captured October 1939 from a flyer named Murphy on Wilson Avenue, Sal's first prisoner of war. The red one near the center, captured in a single afternoon in August 1944 from Eddie 3 blocks east, the only time Sal has ever taken 3 of Eddie's birds in one fight. He returned 2 of them. He kept the leg bands of all 3. He runs a finger along the top row the way he does every morning. Then he turns back to the strongest pair in the breeding box. The male leans into Sal's hand. Flyers say their best birds respond, which means the bird recognizes the flyer's hand and adjusts its body to lean into it. This is not, in the technical sense of the word, a domesticated relationship. The bird is not a pet. It will never come when Sal calls its name. It will never sit on a finger. But it will, when Sal waves the pole, leave the sky and come down to him. And that is a relationship. It took 2 years to train this bird to that level. It will take another year before Sal trusts him in a fight against Eddie's flock. Sal steps out of the coop and pulls the wire door closed behind him. The straw under his boots when he walks back across the roof toward the bulkhead is the same straw he replaced last Saturday. By Friday it will be heavy with droppings, about 12 pounds across the flock. He hauls them down on Saturday mornings in a metal bucket and dumps them in a vacant lot 2 blocks east, where his neighbor Mrs. Cassano has been quietly using Sal's pigeon manure to fertilize her tomato plants for 7 years without ever telling him. He climbs back down 6 flights of stairs, he eats breakfast, he goes to work. The economic logic of Sal's co-op is quietly remarkable. It is a Saturday morning in June 1948. Sal walks into Joseph Aiello's pet shop on Knickerbocker Avenue, 3 blocks from his building. The shop is 20 feet wide and 50 feet deep, lit by 2 bare bulbs, and on a Saturday morning at 9 it is full of men. 6 flyers Sal knows by sight, 2 he doesn't. Joseph behind the counter in a stained apron, weighing out a bag of grain on a brass scale. Sal buys his standard order, 1 50-pound sack of mixed grain, $3.10. A small bottle of vitamin supplement, 65 cents. He pays in coins from a small cloth pouch he keeps in his jacket pocket. He stays for half an hour after, the way he does every Saturday, listening to the men argue about whose flock has been strongest this month. Eddie is there. Eddie owes him a beer. This is the scale of the entire economy of Sal's hobby. The shed itself was built for free in 1939. Salvaged lumber from a construction site on DeKalb, scrap wire mesh, leftover tar paper, $12 and change in nails and hardware, total. The space the shed occupies, 80 square feet of Brooklyn rooftop, has never been billed to him. The birds were originally a gift from his uncle in 1933. Sal has bought stock since: 6 pedigreed birds in 1936 for $28, 4 more in 1944 for $15, but the bulk of his current flock descends from his uncle's gift, with periodic infusions from captured prisoners of war. The grain bag he just bought from Joseph will last 2 weeks. Across a year, the feed and supplements cost him just under $200. Sal's annual wage from the metal shop in 1948 is approximately $2,400. The hobby costs him 8% of his gross income, untaxed and unrecorded. What it gives him in return is harder to quantify. It gives him status in the neighborhood. The Italian men of his generation in Bushwick know who Sal is, partly because of his work, partly because of his family, but mostly because of his co-op. Younger men ask him about feeding schedules. Older men remember when he was a boy following his Uncle Frank around. The pet shop on Knickerbocker. There are 3 pet shops in Bushwick in 1948 that double as flyer headquarters, and Sal goes to all 3 but spends most of his time at one called Joe's, knows him by name. The owner of Joe's, Joseph Aiello, lets Sal store an extra 50-pound feed bag in the back room when supply runs short. It gives him daily rhythm. The birds need attention twice a day, every day, regardless of whether Sal feels like it. This is not a small thing. The men in Sal's neighborhood who do not have something like this, something that demands daily attention outside of work and family, drink. The bars on Flushing and Knickerbocker are full of them every night. Sal is a flyer. Sal is on most nights on his roof. It gives him children. Sal has 2 sons, 12 and 15, both of whom have helped on the roof since they were young enough to fit into a child-size bird-handling apron Sal sewed for them. Both will keep birds themselves as adults. The older son will inherit Sal's coop in 1971 when Sal can no longer climb the stairs. The younger son will keep his own birds in a coop on a different roof 3 blocks away. It gives him, on summer evenings, the sky. That is the part that does not show up in the cost accounting. Sal sits on his roof in the warm hours after dinner, sometimes alone, sometimes with one of his sons, sometimes with Eddie or Hector visiting from their own roofs. The flocks are circling in the air above Bushwick. Sal's flock, Eddie's flock, Hector's flock, and 20 more from 20 more roofs the men can see from where they sit. The birds wheel and turn in formations that the men below have spent decades learning to read. The sky over Bushwick at 7 on a summer evening in 1948 is alive with motion that almost no one in the neighborhood except the flyers fully sees. Pedestrians on the sidewalk look up sometimes and notice a flock. They do not see the geometry of overlapping territories. They do not know that Sal and Eddie and Hector are, in that moment, having a wordless conversation about whose birds will come down to which roof tonight. The sky is one of the only things the men of Sal's class own. To understand why this matters, why a working-class hobby that consumed 8% of a man's income and several hours of his day became something the men of Sal's generation organized their lives around, you have to understand what the rest of their lives look like. Sal works 10 hours a day at a metal shop on Flushing Avenue. The shop fabricates structural steel for buildings going up across Brooklyn and Queens. The work is physical, loud, and repetitive. Sal stands at a machine for 9 of those 10 hours. His foreman, a man named Donnelly, is fair but not friendly. Sal has worked at this shop for 18 years, and he expects to work there for another 15 or 20 before his hands give out. Sal lives in a 4-room apartment with his wife, Teresa, his 2 sons, and his mother-in-law. The apartment has 1 bedroom. Teresa and the mother-in-law share a fold-out cot in the kitchen. The 2 sons share a bed in the front room. Sal sleeps in the bedroom alone because his hours are different from everyone else's. He leaves for work at 6, comes home at 5, eats, goes up to the roof, comes back down at 8, eats again, sleeps from 10 until 6. The mother-in-law has lived with the family since 1942. The apartment was crowded then. It has only become more crowded. The street outside Sal's building is, by 1948 standards, a typical working-class Brooklyn street. There are corner bars, a pool hall, a numbers operation that everyone knows about, occasional gang fights between the older boys, the constant low-grade tension of an unmonitored neighborhood. Sal's two sons come home from school by walking a route that avoids three corners where, on the wrong day, the wrong boys are standing around. The roof is none of those things. The roof is quiet. The roof is high enough that the noise of the street is filtered into background hum. The roof is private, in a way the apartment cannot be, because no one else in the family climbs the bulkhead stairs. The roof is something Sal built himself and maintains himself and is responsible for entirely. Inside the coop, the 8 sections, the breeding boxes, the perches, the medical area, the trophy wall, all of it is organized by Sal's logic. There is no foreman, there is no mother-in-law, there is no Teresa asking when he will fix the leak in the kitchen ceiling. There are pigeons, and the pigeons need what they need, and Sal knows what they need, and he provides it. Gerald Mack's interviews with surviving flyers from this generation return to the same word again and again: peace. The men describe the roof as the only place in their lives that was peaceful. Not exciting, not glamorous, peaceful. A working-class man in 1948 Brooklyn who has worked 10 hours and come home to a 4-room apartment with 5 other people in it does not have many places he can go to be alone with something that does not demand more of him than he can give. He has the bar, he has the roof. The men who chose the roof tended to live longer. There is a moment, somewhere in 1958, where the rooftop pigeon culture of New York peaks and begins, almost imperceptibly, to decline. It begins inside Sal's own apartment. By 1958, Teresa has saved enough from the household money to buy a black-and-white television set. It sits in the front room. It comes with a UHF antenna that picks up 4 channels. The first night the set is on, Sal's younger son, 10 years old, the boy who has been climbing onto the roof with his father since he was 6, watches a Brooklyn Dodgers game from the front room couch instead of helping with the evening release. He does this again the next night. By the end of the summer of 1958, the boy is no longer a flyer. He is a viewer. Across Brooklyn that year, several million working-class apartments are buying their first television sets at roughly the same pace. The roof in 1948 had been free entertainment, structured entertainment, the only entertainment available to a 10-year-old boy on a summer evening. By 1958, the roof has competition. The roof loses. The second decline begins in 1976, on a roof 8 blocks from Sal's on a Tuesday morning. A flyer named Murphy, the same Murphy whose blue leg band sits in the upper left corner of Sal's trophy wall, climbs the bulkhead stairs of his building at 5:30 in the morning, the same way he has climbed them every morning since 1951, and finds the door padlocked. The padlock is new, there is no note, there is no warning. The building has been sold the previous month to a property management company that operates out of a glass tower in Manhattan. The new owner has decided that an open bulkhead door is a liability risk. Murphy stands on the metal stairs for a long minute, listening to his birds calling on the other side of the door. He never gets back into his coop. By 1986, the year Sal himself dies, the locked bulkhead pattern has spread to most of the working-class buildings in Brooklyn that change hands. The unwritten rule that the roof was a tolerated commons, the rule that had held since the 1900s, does not survive the new ownership pattern. It does not get repealed, it gets locked out. The third decline arrives in the 1990s in the form of the new neighbors. Bushwick gentrifies. The first wave of middle-class buyers shows up around 1996. Some of them are artists priced out of Williamsburg. Some are young professionals looking for cheap converted lofts. None of them are flyers. None of them have ever stood on a roof at 5:45 in the morning watching a flock circle north over the borough. In the spring of 1998, Sal's older son, by then 60 years old, still keeping the coop on Sal's old building, still flying the descendants of Sal's 84 birds, receives a letter from the building's management office. A new tenant, a woman who has just moved in on the third floor, has filed a complaint about noise and droppings from the rooftop structure. The letter asks the older son to remove the coop within 30 days. He calls the management company. He explains that the coop has been on this roof since 1939. He explains that the previous tenants understood. The management company is sympathetic. The management company also points out that the new tenant's complaint creates legal exposure, and the building's owner has decided to resolve the exposure by removing the co-op. The coop comes down in May 1998. The older son keeps the birds for 4 more years in a smaller coop on the roof of his own building in Ridgewood, Queens, until that lease too changes hands. The 273 leg bands of Sal's trophy wall come down with the original coop. They are now in a cardboard box in the closet of Sal's grandson's apartment, also in Ridgewood. The grandson is a software engineer. He does not keep birds. By 2010, the sociologist Colin Jerelmack was estimating, based on his own field research and oral histories, that approximately 100 to 150 rooftop pigeon flyers remained active in New York City. The mid-century estimate of thousands had become the present-day estimate of roughly 100. 3 causes: the television in 1958, the padlock in 1976, the complaint letter in 1998. Each one took a different generation away from the roof. The remaining 100 or so flyers in 2026 are concentrated in a few specific neighborhoods. Bushwick still has them, though fewer. The South Bronx has several. Some Dominican and Puerto Rican families in Washington Heights and East Harlem keep birds. A handful of older Italian and Irish flyers, the last living members of Sal's generation, are still active in pockets of Brooklyn and Queens. The men keeping birds in 2026 are mostly older. Some are training younger flyers, sons, nephews, neighborhood kids who wandered up onto a roof one day and asked what the birds were for. Most are not. The hobby is, in the generation now in its 50s and 60s, the last generation that learned it from the men of Sal's era. When that generation is gone, the practice will not be quite gone with them, but it will be, in the form that produced Sal and Eddie and Hector and The War in the Sky, finished. The City Reliquary, a small museum in Williamsburg, has a permanent display of pigeon leg bands and rooftop coop artifacts. The Museum of the City of New York has run features on rooftop coops several times in the past decade. Photographers, including Jerelmack himself, working with the photographer George Steinmetz, have documented the surviving flyers in a way that has the quiet seriousness of historical record. The men being photographed know they are being photographed because they are vanishing. There is a co-op on a roof on Wilson Avenue in Bushwick, 4 blocks from where Sal's coop stood, that has been continuously maintained since 1948. The current operator is a man named Hector. A different Hector, not Sal's friend, but the son of a different Hector who learned from Sal's friend in 1962. The coop holds approximately 60 birds. Hector flies them every morning at 6. The release is the same as it was in 1948, the wire latch, the bamboo pole with a strip of red rag, the wave above the head. The birds rise off the roof together. They climb. They begin to wheel. There is no longer a war. Most of the surrounding rooftops have no birds, and so the flock circles alone for 10 or 15 minutes before returning. The return is what is worth standing on Wilson Avenue at 6 in the morning to see. The flock comes down in a loose spiral, 60 pairs of wings catching the air at the same time, the sound, heard from the sidewalk if you are paying attention, like canvas snapping in a low wind. They drop one by one onto the landing platform of Hector's coop. Hector counts them as they go in. When the count reaches 60, he closes the wire door behind them. Then he stands on the roof for a moment. Hector is 68 years old. He has not yet decided who will inherit the birds. On a clear evening in June 2026, if you stand on Wilson Avenue and look up, which almost nobody does even now, you can sometimes see Hector's flock at the top of its circle, 60 pigeons against the pale blue, holding the position they have held above this block for 78 years. The sky is mostly empty above them. It used to be full.